Next on AM 1480 WLEA, the Newsmaker Show. Here's Brian O'Neill.
And saying good morning to Alfred University Professor of History, Dr. Gary Ostrower. Dr. Ostrower, thanks for coming in as always.
Good morning to you.
Yikes. Giuliani on CNN with Chris Cuomo. I don't have the exact quote, but what happened was Rudy Giuliani was talking about the presidential power to pardon himself, and Giuliani went on to give an example and said, well, suppose Trump shot Comey, just as an example. Trump could pardon himself, or something to that effect.
Well, Giuliani, I guess, can say whatever he wants. What I find a little peculiar about it is that Giuliani was a prosecutor. He was the head of the prosecution office in the Southern District of New York, one of the most important offices, U.S. attorney's offices in the country. So to hear him saying this is just, I think, kind of weird. But I don't think one should take Giuliani too seriously. He's all over the place. He said, as a matter of fact, as recently, I think, as last night, that he had originally, Trump's lawyer had said that Trump, in fact, had dictated a statement that was read following the famous meeting way back on June 9th of 2016 in Trump Tower between some of Trump's key campaign managers, including his son, Donald Jr., and that Russian operative, that Russian intelligence operative. Initially, the White House, not the White House, but the Trump organization had said that Trump didn't know anything about it, that he had not dictated anything. It turns out that he did dictate the statement. Now Giuliani is saying, well, no, he didn't dictate the statement. And, Giuliani tries to confuse things. So I don't think that one should take, what Giuliani says all that seriously, except in this sense. And I think that there's a very important point that one should make. What Giuliani is essentially saying is that the president is above the law. That's important. That's extremely important. If you go back to 1776, if you go back to the Constitutional Convention of 1787, what you're going to find is that Americans, the people who wrote that Constitution, our founding fathers, were absolutely unanimously, in opposition to the idea that the president is above the law. As a matter of fact, the American Revolution had been, to a certain extent, and a revolution against King George III of England, precisely because we argued that King George III had placed himself above the law. So, for instance, President Trump, not just Giuliani, claims that, number one, he cannot be indicted. He cannot be accused of obstruction of justice. They claim that he cannot be required to meet with Bob Mueller, the investigator. They claim that he cannot be subpoenaed. They claim that he can pardon anyone, of course, including himself, and that was Giuliani's point. Well, what this means is that, yeah, there is someone in America who is above the law. The president is above the law. If you want to look at 20th century examples, even 21st century examples of what this means, take a look at the history of Italy during the period from 1920 until 1943, during the Second World War. What the president is placing himself into is a situation, is a kind of position that Mussolini held in Italy, or that other certain European dictators held. And that's not the American experience. That's not the American tradition, and it's not the American way. So I think that, where all this leads us to is an understanding that democracy, that what we really mean by democracy, doesn't only mean that, people vote. It means free elections, certainly. It means a free press. It means a right to free speech, free expression, as we put it. But it also means that there is a right to dissent, and most importantly of all, and I'm going to argue this today, and I'm sure you'll hear it sometime in the future, it means that we have to respect the rule of law. And when we talk about the rule of law, when we use that phrase, when I say we, I'm talking about we historians. When we use that term, what it boils down to is two things. Number one, constitutional government. And what constitutional government means is that there are limits on power, that everyone, that every single individual is subject to the law, is subject, in other words, to the limitations of the Constitution. And that even includes President Donald Trump.
Getting back to Giuliani for a moment, if we could. Giuliani says that Chris Christie is going to help Trump prepare to talk with Comey. Christie came right out and said, no, that's not true. So you see a little tension there. Then you've got Mike Pompeo seems pretty uncomfortable with having John Bolton around these days. When Kim Jong-un and Trump said Pompeo was there, and John Bolton was not. What do you make of those two situations?
Well, I think that the Bolton situation is very, very interesting. Bolton, after all, is the chief of staff. He's the head of the National Security Council. And he's not the head of the chief of staff. John Kelly, General Kelly is.
I was about to say that, yeah.
But he's the head of the National Security Council. To have him absent at a time when the president or the Secretary of State is meeting with a very, very high-level North Korean official, to work out the details, if you will, of this meeting that they're going to have on June 12th in Singapore, I find that to be astounding. And I'm not sure how long we're going to see John Bolton in that position. Bolton is uncompromising. He has been called demented. I would certainly argue against that particular view. But, he's a real hardliner. And quite clearly, right now, the president and his team are not taking a very hard line with the North Koreans. They want this meeting, and they want this meeting to be a success, whatever they mean by a success. I don't know how things are going to work out in the long run, but I think that that you have a quarrel between the Secretary of State on one hand and the head of the National Security Council on the other is exceedingly interesting. I might say historically, this is not all that unusual. When President Carter, for instance, was president, there was a good deal of tension between the head of the National Security Council, who is Zbigniew Brzezinski, and the Secretary of State, a man by the name of Cyrus Vance. They certainly had no love for each other, but they didn't exclude each other from important meetings like this. And there have been some other occasional things. When Richard Nixon was president, the head of the National Security Council, at least during his first term, was Henry Kissinger. The Secretary of State was I'm blanking on his name right now, but he was a New York lawyer, and they didn't have very much respect for each other. And so, there has been, a certain amount of jockeying for influence within the context of the administration. But this seems to be, very, very unexpected and very, very unusual, and I'm not sure where it's going to lead. I will say one thing that's, I think, kind of important, at least from my perspective, and that is that, okay, we're going to have a meeting on June 12th. I can tell you categorically, and I say this not only as a historian, but as a historian of American diplomatic history, of American foreign policy, that the North Koreans are not going to agree to, eliminate their nuclear arsenal. We don't know how many weapons they have, nuclear weapons, probably somewhere between maybe a low number of 20, a high number of perhaps 40 or 45 or so. This is their trump card. This is their ace in the. They're not giving this away. And so what's going to happen at this meeting? And I think two things may happen. Number one, they're going to set the stage for future meetings. So, the kind of negotiations that we're talking about are not going to happen on one day, on a June 12th. They're going to happen over the course of maybe 1 or 2 years. The agreement that the Americans made, that Obama made with the Iranians back around, 2012, 2013, they took 2 full years of very, very hard bargaining. And I see no reason to think that this is going to be any different. That's number one. So this is really chapter 1. This is not the end of the story. Secondly, if something does come out of this, my hunch, and folks, I have no, hard evidence for what I'm going to say right now. My hunch is that what we're going to see is the real beginnings of a peace negotiation between North Korea on one hand and South Korea on the other hand. In other words, I think we're looking at the beginning of the end of the Korean War. In that sense, the Korean War, the South Koreans are going to have much more to do with what happens on June 12th, what happens in a week, than we've been led to believe.
Very interesting prediction there. Talking with Alfred University history professor Dr. Gary Ostrower. Let's take a break right now. We'll take a quick break. Check the forecast. When we come back, we'll talk about Bill Clinton yesterday on the was at the Today Show, and we'll talk about yesterday's Supreme Court ruling. Stay with us.
Getting healthy or staying healthy is a year-round focus for many people, so detecting potential health problems early is an important first step. It is estimated that only 1 in 3 adults receive all the recommended health screenings, many of which can detect a health problem before it becomes serious. Take charge of your health today and talk to your doctor about screenings that can help guide you to a healthier life. For more information and videos, visit stjamesmercy.org and click on the link for services and clinics available at St. James Mercy Hospital.
Checking in now with meteorologist Rob Carolyn. Rob, it's not air conditioner weather anymore. Here we are on June the 5th. What are we looking at for the whole summer? And give us the usual today, tomorrow, etc.
Well, Brian, I think the cool pattern is going to continue for at least several more weeks. I don't see any sign of this northwesterly flow pattern breaking down anytime soon. In fact, you look back at the data for the last several springs over the last 5 years, and we've only had 1 spring out of 5 where temperatures have been near normal or above. 4 out of the 5 springs we've been averaging cooler and wetter than normal. It's due to this prevailing troughiness in the upper parts of the atmosphere. A dip of the jet stream brings the jet right over us, suppresses the Bermuda high to the south, keeps the heat and humidity for the most part to our south. We've got another cold front coming through the area this morning, and that's why we've got the clouds and the showers. So I think this is the pattern June into July. At some point, the Bermuda high will take over. But if I was a betting man, I'd say that's not until mid to late July, and then it's probably very nice the second half of July through August and into September like last year. Today, a lot of cloudiness around, especially this morning, Brian. That's when we have our best chance for showers. I'm seeing some breaks in the cloudiness over southeastern Ontario. That may allow the sun to come out later today for a little while. 65 today. May have a shower or two tonight. We're 45 to 50. For tomorrow, more clouds than sunshine. The risk of a shower, we're up to 60 to 65. Tomorrow night, partial clearing 50, and then partly sunny, milder Thursday, 70 to 75. Brian, sunrise this morning was at 5:34. The sun will set tonight at 8:44.
And we're back with Alfred University history professor Dr. Gary Ostrower. Bill Clinton did not help himself, or I would say Chelsea Clinton, if she ever has any political ambitions yesterday. Yeah, that was, I can understand he's tired of answering the questions on this. He's been talking about this for a long time, and a lot of people have been hitting him over the head for years about this, but he did not handle himself well yesterday.
Yeah, he was interviewed by Craig Melvin on NBC. And he got very, very testy. I think you're right, he didn't handle himself very well. I mean, rule number 1 for a politician, keep your cool. And Clinton didn't exactly keep his cool. On the other hand, I thought that the interview was really a pretty good interview. I thought that Craig Melvin was tough, and I think that he was fair to do exactly what he said to Clinton. Clinton basically said that, look, I apologized and I shouldn't have to apologize again. Well, did he apologize? The answer is, on one level, he apologized very publicly. He apologized, in front of cameras. He apologized in front of microphones. But I'll tell you what he did not do, which is to pick up the phone and say to Monica Lewinsky, I'm sorry. He never did that. If someone had really, seriously abused you, and they had to apologize, unless they apologize to your face, unless they apologize directly to you, as far as I'm concerned, it's not a genuine apology. His apology was political rather than personal. And I think in a situation like this, Monica Lewinsky has every reason to feel that she was abused. People say, well, Monica Lewinsky was 21. She was past the age of consent. She wasn't a minor. Well, that's all true. It's all true. But the fact of the matter is that there was a huge difference in the relationship between the President of the United States and a very, very young, very, very inexperienced 21-year-old intern. Clinton took advantage of her, and he should pick up the phone to this very, very day. He should pick up the phone and do what he never really had the courage to do, which was to, make that very, very personal apology.
saw a special on Fox on it was kind of done in, some of it was acting, some of it was documentary form on the Fox News channel on the Lewinsky Clinton situation back in the 90s. And one of the things that struck me about it was Monica Lewinsky did not want this all to come out. You know, it wasn't, okay, this is my big chance, I can make a lot of money here. It wasn't that situation at all. The feds got into it as part of the investigation into the Paula Jones situation. And that kind of sets Monica Lewinsky apart from, you know, the whole, you know, what's the phrase, gold digger type situation where a younger woman goes out with an older man and then tries to get a lot of money out of the situation. That's a little bit different.
I agree, and I think that, I think that Monica Lewinsky was abused not only by the President of the United States, she was abused by the system, but she was also abused by another individual. So let's, talk about,
Who would
individual
that be?
Responsibility. Ken Starr. I mean, Ken Starr used Monica Lewinsky. The Republicans used Monica Lewinsky against the president. I mean,
Do you think they got too many salacious details out of her unnecessarily?
Absolutely. Look, I mean, she became a political instrument. She was abused by a number of different people, not the least of whom was the president, of course. But I think that, from my perspective, looking back over 20 years or so, and it really is 20 years now, she's perhaps the only one in this entire situation who really comes out with a certain amount of honor. If you take, she has been gone public really only in this past year, and what she has said, she wrote an op-ed that appeared in the New York Times, and at least from my perspective, it was a very, very human and a very, very honest statement. I think that she has a lot to say, and we may hear more from her in the future. But in any case, to continue to use her as a kind of foil is, I think, unfortunate. I also think, you mentioned Fox News. I was watching Fox and Friends this morning, and I heard something which, once again, just kind of boggles my own mind, which is that they said Clinton did not apologize. Well, Clinton of course claims that he did apologize, and in a way he did, very, very publicly, but it was precisely because it was inadequate. I mean, I think that Fox is simply wrong, absolutely wrong, to say that he never apologized. I think that you talk about fake news, that's fake news. But Clinton's apology was not sincere. Clinton's apology, I think, was more political than it was personal, and I think until it becomes personal, I have very, very little to say to defend Bill Clinton on this.
He didn't help himself. He's usually a very good speaker, and he doesn't usually lose his cool like that. I'm surprised he didn't think that question was coming and wasn't more prepared for it.
Yeah, that's a good point, Brian. I don't think he was prepared for it. He came in there to talk about his new book, the book that he wrote together that he co-authored with James Patterson, and he seemed to be taken by surprise. By the same token, not only was he taken by surprise, he seemed to speak without confidence. I think he somehow knew, maybe that, consciously, that he was unprepared. He wasn't quite sure how he was going to handle that.
What did you think of it? And he did say one thing that was kind of interesting to the reporter. He said, to the interviewer, you would not ask... Would you ask President Kennedy? That's the way he said it. Would you ask President Kennedy or President Johnson, implying that they had affairs, which everybody kind of knows. Would you have asked Kennedy or Johnson to resign? What do you make of that reply?
Well, what I make of that reply is that I find that Clinton's response was, in some ways, it paralleled Trump's response to the claims that he has had, that he has abused women over the course of years and years. I mean, there are 19 women who have come forward with very, very credible stories about the way in which Trump has abused them. So what is Trump's defense? Trump's defense is, others have done it before me. Well, that's Clinton's defense. Americans right now. And I think that, in a number of other ways, Clinton's defense is, kind of paralleling what Trump has said. Well, it didn't happen. Well, it did happen. I apologize, but I really didn't apologize. I mean, I think that, both men are following a kind of pattern here, and I think it's unfortunate. I think that, if you're president of the United States, the real bottom line is that I guess you get away with these things, even though you should never, never, never have done it in the first place.
The Supreme Court ruling yesterday on the cake bakers and the LGBTQ weddings.
I'm not a constitutional historian. I'm not a legal historian, so I don't want to get into this too far. I haven't really followed the case as well as perhaps as closely as some other people. But what it does, it strikes me that the decision was made on very, very narrow grounds. And the narrow grounds focused on the fact that a civil rights commission to which the case was initially brought, I think it was in Indiana, I'm not positive of the state, was not very fair. That is to say, they weren't as fair to the baker as they were to the plaintiffs, the people who were the two gay fellows who were prosecuting this case, who brought the case to court. And so, in that sense, if I'm correct about that, I think that it's a very, very important victory for the baker, but it's not going to set precedent. As a matter of fact, Justice Kennedy, in his decision, in his concurring decision, made the point, if not what the concurring decision, he wrote the chief decision. He made the point that yes, the courts have to be fair, but by the same token, he made the point that we have to be fair to all Americans. We can't discriminate, and so forth. And so I think that the next time there's a similar case like this, we may find a very, very different kind of outcome. I think we're going to have to be a little bit patient when it comes to dealing with this sort of thing. Kennedy remains the key guy. And I think, Brian, I would note that this was not a 5-4 decision, as so many other recent decisions have been. It was a 7-2 decision. If I'm not mistaken, Justice Breyer and Justice Kagan sided with the conservative majority on this. So, once again, I wouldn't place too much emphasis on the importance of this particular case, other than for the particular individuals involved.
Okay, we're out of time. We've been speaking with Alfred University history professor Dr. Gary Ostrower. Dr. Ostrower, as always, thanks for coming in.
Well, thank you very much for having me here.